Welcome back to a purring Wolverine, and may the 4th be with you. Of course, by today it's not May 4th unless you're watching it in the future. That's how the upload schedule works, but today is May 4th. So, may the 4th be with you and happy Star Wars Day. Today we're going to talk about my favorite character, Thrawn, or as he's known with his Chiss family. Not really family, or as he's known in the Chiss Empire, Mithron Yorodo. Although they would tell me that I'm mispronouncing that because apparently humans can't pronounce Chiss names very well. We are going to start way back at the beginning. Thrawn is introduced first as a member of Palpatine's Admiralty in his navy, but we're going to start from Thrawn's beginning. He was actually born Kivu Ronuru. Yeah, Kivu Ronuru, because he was born to the Kivu family. His core name was Vuron, but his military prowess and his incredible genius through military school, despite a handful of controversies, got him elevated to one of the 9 ruling families, the Myth, which changed his name to Mithronir. And his core name was Thrawn. Thrawn gets the Yodo added to his name when he does a great service for the Stybla family. The Stybla is another one of the important families in the Chiss ascendancy. And so Thrawn eventually becomes Mithron Yorodo. Thrawn is my favorite because he studies the culture and philosophy and art of a species to know their combat tactics. It's super interesting how he draws the conclusions and how the character is written originally by Timothy Zahn in the books, and then Dave Filoni, I suppose, in his writing team in Rebels. It's important to note that the Thrawn I'm talking about is new canon Disney Thrawn. Timothy Zahn actually kicked off the old legacy extended universe with the Thrawn books, so bringing him back into the real canon after Disney bought it was pretty amazing for me. But Thrawn's history with the Chiss is complicated. He regularly does things that are slightly or directly against Chiss ascendancy rules. They are the predominant superpower in their region of space, and so they have very strict non-aggression, non-first strike policies, and very strict interaction with other species policies, most of which Thrawn ignores because he sees a greater threat that others do not. This gets him in trouble repeatedly. In fact, there's even a member of the Myth family who is actively attempting to get him discredited and removed from the family because they view him as a threat. However, his close peer, who eventually becomes an Admiral Aralani, and General Bakif, who are well-placed and well-respected military minds in the Chiss ascendancy, regularly protect Thrawn when he makes missteps. So, for example, the ship was seen attacking other ships before being attacked first because the attack was implied. Thrawn helps another alien species while they are being attacked, which technically breaks the first strike rule because he provided military assistance. All sorts of edge cases that politically don't work well for Thrawn, even though militarily they are very important. The greatest drawback of Thrawn is that he has no political mind. He doesn't understand the intrigues and the lies and the game of politics. He is very much a military-minded man, although obviously he has great appreciation for the arts, as that's how he gleaned gains his military insights. During this time when Thrawn is running the he's an officer in the Chiss expansionary defense fleet, he actually interacts with Anakin Skywalker on the edge of their respective spaces. They come into contact with each other. At the time, Thrawn has a very interesting insight, as Skywalker means something to the Chiss as well. They have Force-sensitive girls, typically between 7 and 13, who do their interstellar navigation. They do not use droids. Actually, it seems like they may not even have the technology to do long-distance light-speed jumps with droids. They require these Force-sensitive beings. The galaxy around them uses the Navigators Guild, grown people who connect to the Force in a certain way, specifically to navigate. But the Chiss have a secret corps called Skywalkers, of young Force-sensitive women. The women seem to lose the Force sensitivity at 13 or 14, which plays a big role in their own lives. But with Anakin, Thrawn teaches him sort of how to skywalk, if you will, how to anticipate the future through light speed. Although, of course, we never see that in the movies, because this book was written just a few years ago. But then much later, when Thrawn goes on an individual mission with Darth Vader, it becomes clear that he knows Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker, and it becomes clear that Darth Vader knows that Thrawn knows. Would be an interesting threat, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Throughout Thrawn's main military campaign with the Chiss, he is defending the Chiss ascendancy from an incursion from the Grisks. The Grisks are a very mysterious species that, as of yet, have barely interacted with the known Star Wars universe. They do actually come into the Empire at large. That is part of what Thrawn and Vader fight off, as a Grisk incursion. But the Grisks attempt a very sneaky and subtle entry into Chiss space, both through political intrigue and capturing military might in neighboring species, due to the Chiss ascendancy's own, I guess, part xenophobia, but maybe part just racism through belief that they are indeed supreme, and they really don't pay attention to their local space outside of their borders as much as they should. That is strictly the purview of the expansionary defense fleet. So, because of that, the Grisks and their leader Grisks, who would speak, at least in the audiobook that I listened to, in a very dramatic way. The audiobook, I believe, is read by Chris Thompson. Most of the audiobooks for Thrawn books, he's really good. He does a great Thrawn voice, and his Grisks is outrageous. Actually, to be fair, audiobooks are just outrageous. I could do a whole video on how much I just appreciate various different audiobook voiceover actors. The breadth and depth of voice acting for audiobooks is unbelievable. Anyway, during his time with the expansionary defense fleet at going up against the Grisks, Thrawn uses a lot of different subtle techniques to stop the Grisks at every turn, and it's actually full of twists. Right up to the very end, you're not really sure how they could ever expect to pull off the final victory at the final battle, and they do so through unbelievable ingenuity from Thrawn and the ability to predict the enemy better than they can predict themselves. In the end, though, his attack on the Grisk warships is seen as the ultimate first strike against an alien force, because, as I mentioned, Jixtus and the Grisks had been very sneaky in the way they had gone about things, and they had never openly attacked the Chiss Ascendancy. So despite the fact that the Chiss military wing understood exactly the threat they were under, the political wing believed that there was no threat. Because of this, Thrawn is exiled. Exile is very rare in the Chiss Ascendancy. In fact, when it comes down that he's being exiled, there is a bit of a hubbub amongst his crew, but the leaders have all worked out a plan. His exile is actually to go to the New Republic, as it is now the burgeoning Empire. Palpatine at this time has just taken over. And they send Thrawn to be found by this Empire on the edge of their space so that he can evaluate them as a threat. Are they a threat to the Chiss Ascendancy, etc.? When Thrawn is found, he infiltrates the stormtrooper garrison that finds him on the planet that he's exiled on, eventually gets in front of Palpatine, and Palpatine puts him through naval school, which is pretty funny, because he's a first officer who runs his own ship for the Chiss Ascendancy, and then he restarts as a guy going through base naval school. But at the time, of course, he doesn't even speak basic. He only speaks the Chiss language and Meniciat, which is a trade language from the Outer Territories. Actually, he speaks a couple different trade languages that are also used in the Outer Rim Territories, but he doesn't speak basic yet. So as he goes through school, he increasingly gets promoted faster and faster and faster. Obviously, it's the Empire, so he makes some enemies along the way, but he deals with them, as you would imagine. Ultimately, through his work with Vader and because of his work for Palpatine, he's granted the rank of Grand Admiral. I have all these notes here. I'm barely referring to them. But once he gets the rank of Grand Admiral, he's actually one of 12. So there are 12 Grand Admirals. He's the only non-human Grand Admiral. His military mind is such and Palpatine recognizes his military mind as such, that he is elevated and becomes the only non-human, really, officer in the entire Empire, but certainly the only Grand Admiral. In fact, all of the Grand Admirals are subsequently killed at the Battle for Death Star 2. When the second Death Star explodes, it kills most of them, and the rest of them are mopped up right after that. That's one of the pieces that falls out in between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, is a breaking down and a reconsolidating of the Empire because there are no Grand Admirals to lead it. Thrawn is the only Grand Admiral to survive, and he survives because of a weird quirk. And that quirk comes courtesy of Star Wars Rebels, which was actually how Thrawn got reintroduced into new canon. I can remember the trailer that played and had Thrawn's voice in the background, and before he said,
"To defeat an enemy, you must know them. Not simply their battle tactics, but their history, philosophy, art."
Grand Admiral Thrawn.
Carabast.
As soon as he said their art and their culture in the background, he's in the shadow, I knew it was Thrawn. I sat forward. They have Thrawn walk out of the shadow. Oh, it was so exciting. And the whole first season, the first 2 seasons of Star Wars Rebels, the Rebels had just been kicking butt. It was like classic Star Wars. They were toying around with the Empire. They were making them look foolish. Thrawn got put on their case and just wrecks them. Just victory after victory after victory for the Empire. And you're like, oh my god, this guy is horrifying. Like, he gets it. He just sees through the sneaky plan of the Jedi. During this time, he comes up with a design for the TIE Interceptor, a TIE fighter that has increased firepower and also shielding. Because of his conflicts with other people in the Empire, and because of a handful of key mistakes while he's away from the world designing these, he's pulled away by Palpatine, I believe, from Lothal, where he's designing these TIE Interceptors, and his replacement, Admiral Sloane, is dumpstered on by the Rebels team, and it ends up long-term pretty much scuttling the Defender project, which I guess is good, because if TIE Defenders had become put into the arsenal, it's pretty clear that they would have turned the tide of battle. TIE Fighters are known for high maneuverability and firepower, but having no shielding at all, which is why it's sort of an even battle between the heavily shielded, moderately fired-powered X-Wings of the Rebels. You had even some slight shields with the TIE Defender, and the fight's not even close. I'm going to ignore the dogs, and we're just going to plow forward, y'all. I apologize for the dogs, but this is the 3rd time I've tried to record this video today. There's a lot of dogs. Grand Admiral Thrawn, I didn't want to go too deep into it because there's a lot of spoilers. We can do another video where there's spoilers, but this is just a video where I ramble on about my favorite character and hopefully get you a little bit excited about his insight, and how he's able to sort of flip the situation on the good guys. What's interesting, I say the good guys, but it's really, he joins the Empire to evaluate them as a threat. Palpatine keeps him away from a lot of the more nasty pieces, and they also just don't examine how Thrawn feels about, like, the Empire using slaves, for example, because in the Chiss Ascendancy, they do not. He's pretty much a good guy when he's with the Chiss Ascendancy and then joins the Empire. He joins the Empire post-Order 66, so obviously he's given a very false narrative of the history of the Jedi by Palpatine. But he's not good at political maneuvering, so it's certainly possible he just gets manipulated by the incredibly politically savvy Sheev Palpatine. But they just don't really discuss that. For the most part, he's a military mind, he does military things, and then he's launched to the Outer Rim. Well, sorry, not to the Outer Rim, to the unknown regions. And of course, that's the big piece of Star Wars, that there's like this tiny thread. Sheev Palpatine has fear of the unknown regions. There's some sort of superpower in the unknown regions. Thrawn and even the Chiss see that the Grisks are coming from unknown space, even to them. In unknown space, you find Erigol, the Sith homeworld, featured in Episode 9. Like, unknown space, outside of the Outer Rim and even Chiss space, is ripe with dangers in Star Wars, and I suppose that Ahsoka, Ezra, and Thrawn could all go there together. Not that that wouldn't be disappointing. I mean, ultimately they should have just been involved in the movies in one way or another, which is why they should have waited to make those movies until like this year rather than jumping on the money. Can you imagine if Disney had made Star Wars or bought Star Wars, waited a couple years, let Dave Filoni put out Rebels, do another couple seasons of Clone Clone Wars series. They released Mandalorian a couple years ago. It was 2-3 years after they got the license that they started spinning up Mandalorian. You know, it didn't come out for a couple years after that, but they put Mandalorian up front. Then you get Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Thrawn, Ezra, Mandalorian 2, and then you have this rich cast of characters. And you want to introduce Poe and Finn and Rey in the movies, because obviously movies have their own set of storyline and their own set of... Fine. Rey is trained by Ahsoka, who didn't join Luke's temple for obvious reasons. Finn is a spin-off who, for some reason, gets to interact with Thrawn. Thrawn's on the good guy team now because of Ezra. Locates Finn as talent. He's not a fucking custodian. He's a force-sensitive Empire he's a force-sensitive stormtrooper that the Empire doesn't see because we're not looking for it. Thrawn does because he's been closely interacting with many different expressions of the Force, with the Navigators and the Skywalkers, and then Skywalker and the Jedi. The potential for such a phenomenal ending to the Skywalker era in 7, 8, and 9 was there. But then I suppose if they had waited, Carrie Fisher would have passed before the movies. Hadn't thought about that one. Still think they should have waited for narrative reasons. Anyway, Grand Admiral Thrawn, Mythron Neurodo, the cultural and artistic military genius that the Empire and the Chiss Ascendancy never appreciated as much as they should have. If you get a chance to read any of his books or listen to them, which is what I would suggest, to be honest, I would go for it. You can obviously get them on Audible, but you could hope that your local library also has them, as many libraries have audiobooks now. But with that, I thank you for joining me today. May the 4th be with you, and we'll see you next time on A Purring Wolverine.